The great hall of the Galactic Concord stretched for what seemed like forever, its crystalline walls catching light from 1,000 floating orbs that drifted near the ceiling like captive stars. Commander Elena Vasquez stood at the center of this magnificent space, feeling very small and very aware that every alien eye in the chamber was fixed upon her with something between curiosity and contempt. She had prepared for this moment her entire life. Training in the academies of Earth, climbing through the ranks of humanity's fledgling space fleet, and finally earning the honor of representing her species at this historic gathering today, humanity would officially join the Galactic Concord, a union of spacefaring civilizations that had existed for over 50,000 years. The Arbiter towered above her on his ceremonial platform, an insectoid creature standing nearly 3 meters tall with compound eyes that reflected her image 1,000 times over his. Mandibles clicked together in patterns that her translator struggled to interpret, and decorative metals hung from his exoskeleton like medals of ancient wars. "The Concord welcomes humanity to our fellowship," the Arbiter announced, his voice echoing through the hall in a way that made Elena's chest vibrate around her. Ambassadors from over 100 different species watched the proceedings with expressions ranging from boredom to amusement. The Velthari delegation floated in their containment fields, beings of pure crystalline light that had mastered space travel when humanity was still learning to make fire. The Morvith representatives sat in their gravity chairs, their massive forms adapted to crushing pressures that would kill a human. Instantly, the Thesan observers phased in and out of visibility, their bodies existing partially in dimensions that human minds could barely comprehend, and all of them looked at Elena like she was a child who had wandered into a gathering of adults, as is tradition, the Arbiter continued. "The Concord presents each new member species with a vessel befitting their status among the stars." Elena felt her heart quicken at these words. She had studied the history of these gift vessels, knowing that each species received something remarkable upon joining the Velthari had been given crystalline warships that could bend light itself into weapons of terrible beauty. The Morvith received dreadnoughts capable of manipulating gravity, turning the fundamental forces of the universe into tools of conquest. Thesan were presented with phase-capable vessels that could slip between dimensions like ghosts through walls. What would humanity receive? Elena wondered. As the Arbiter transmitted a data package to her neural interface, she opened the file and felt her blood run cold. The ship was called the Reclamation. Though that name seemed like a cruel joke given its condition, it was a Korath cargo hauler, a species that had gone extinct 3 centuries ago, and the vessel had been sitting in a salvage yard ever since the radiation shielding was at 40%, meaning the crew would slowly poison themselves just by living aboard. The engines could barely achieve half the standard jump velocity used by modern ships. The weapon systems had been completely stripped, leaving nothing but empty mounting brackets where guns should have been. The hull had 17 separate sectors where the integrity had been compromised, places where nothing but emergency force fields stood between the crew and the vacuum of space. Elena stared at the specifications in disbelief as laughter rippled through the assembled ambassadors. They were not even trying to hide it now, their alien voices making sounds of mockery that needed no translation. Lieutenant Commander Okonkwo, watching from the observation gallery above, sent a furious message through their private communication channel, demanding that Elena walk out of this insult. Chief Engineer Yusuf followed with a rapid calculation of repair costs, numbers so astronomical they represented decades of Earth's entire economic output. Weapons Officer Chun simply broadcast a stream of Mandarin profanity that made Elena glad the alien translators could not decode it, but Elena silenced them all with a single thought, shutting down the communication channel with the authority of her command. She would not give these ancient species the satisfaction of seeing humanity Break. The Council trusts humanity will find this vessel adequate for their needs, the Arbiter said. And his mandibles clicked in what Elena now recognized as laughter. The sound was taken up by others in the hall. A chorus of alien amusement at the primitive newcomers who dared to reach for the stars. Elena felt the anger burning in her chest, a fire that threatened to consume her professional composure, but she had learned long ago that anger was a tool, not a master. It could be channeled and directed toward productive ends, rather than wasted on satisfying displays of emotion. The Council's generosity is noted, she said. Her voice steady and clear. She did not thank them, for there was nothing to thank them for. She did not complain, for complaints would only feed their contempt. She simply acknowledged what had been done and turned to walk out of the chamber with her spine straight and her head held high. The shuttle ride back to Earth's orbital station passed in heavy silence. Her crew sat around her with expressions of fury and humiliation, their dreams of joining the galactic community shattered by the reality of what that community thought of them. Yusuf was the first to speak, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion. "Commander, that thing is not a ship," he said, pulling up the specifications on a holographic display so everyone could see the full extent of the disaster. "It is an execution waiting to happen." The others nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting the hopelessness of their situation. Elena stared out the viewport at the stars stretching into infinity, the same stars that humanity had dreamed of reaching since they first looked up from their caves and wondered what lay beyond. "No," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight of determination that made her crew fall silent. "It is a test." She turned to face them, and something in her eyes made them straighten in their seats. "They wanted to see how we would react to humiliation," Elena continued. "They wanted to watch us crumble or rage or beg for something better." She stood and walked to the viewport, pressing her palm against the cold glass. "But they have made a terrible mistake," she said. "They have given us motivation." Okonkwo frowned in confusion, not understanding what his commander meant. "They think they know what we are," Elena explained. "They think we are weak because we are young, primitive because our technology is limited, worthless because we do not fit their ancient standards." She turned back to her crew with a smile that held no humor but promised something far more powerful. "They have no idea what they have just started," she said. "They have no idea what happens when you tell humanity that something is impossible." The crew looked at each other, and slowly understanding began to dawn on their faces. Chief Engineer Yusuf leaned forward, his mind already racing with possibilities. "Commander," he said, "are you suggesting we actually try to make that wreck functional?" "Functional," Elena repeated, tasting the word and finding it insufficient. "No, Yusuf. I am suggesting we make it legendary." She pulled up the specifications again, but this time she was not looking at the problems. She was looking at the opportunities. "Every system on this ship is outdated by Concord standards," she said. "But that means every system is a blank canvas waiting to be replaced." Chung caught on next, her weapons expertise already analyzing the empty mounting brackets. "They stripped the weapons because they assumed we could not replace them," she said. "But they did not specify what we could or could not install." Okonkwo nodded slowly as the implications became clear. "The Concord has rules about ship modifications," he said. "But I have read those rules, and they apply to member species upgrading their own vessels." "Exactly," Elena said. "Gift vessels have no such restrictions because no one ever imagined the species would be desperate enough to rebuild one from scratch." The despair in the shuttle began to transform into something else, something that felt like hope mixed with a hunger for vindication. Yusuf was already making notes, listing specialists he would need, technologies they could adapt, impossible solutions they could attempt. "This will take everything we have," he warned. "Every resource, every expert, Every innovation humanity can muster. Elena nodded, accepting the challenge without hesitation. Then we had better get started, she said, because when we are done, the Concorde will learn a lesson they should have studied in their history books. She looked at each of her crew members in turn, seeing the fire that was building in their eyes. 18 months had passed since that humiliating day in the Concorde's Great Hall, and the reclamation no longer resembled the rusting hulk that had been dumped on humanity. Like garbage, the ship floated in Earth's orbital shipyard, surrounded by construction drones and work platforms where engineers labored around the clock in rotating shifts. Chief Engineer Yusuf stood on an observation deck overlooking his creation. Exhaustion carved into the lines of his face, but pride burning bright in his eyes. He had assembled a team of 1,200 specialists from every corner of Earth, bringing together minds that had never imagined. Working side by side, aerospace engineers who designed atmospheric craft collaborated with submarine architects who understood pressure and structural stress in ways their counterparts never had. Materials scientists shared laboratories with theoretical physicists, each group pushing the other toward discoveries that neither could have made alone. Software developers worked alongside historians who had studied every naval innovation in human history, from the triremes of ancient Greece to the nuclear submarines of the modern era. And somehow, impossibly, they had created something that the Galactic Concorde had never seen before. Commander Elena Vasquez walked through the corridors of the rebuilt reclamation with Yusuf at her side, running her fingers along walls that gleamed with a new purpose. The Concorde thinks in terms of refinement, Yusuf explained as they passed through the engineering section. They have possessed faster-than-light travel for 50,000 years. And in that time, they have optimized their designs to near perfection. He paused at a massive viewing window that looked down into the engine compartment. But optimization is not innovation. He continued. They iterate on what exists, making small improvements generation after generation. But they have forgotten how to think in revolutionary terms. Elena looked down at the engine assembly, which bore no resemblance to what the original Korath designers had installed, where those ancient engines had been bulky and inefficient, standardized according to Concorde specifications that had not changed in millennia. Humanity had installed something entirely new. Tell me about the drive system, Elena said, genuinely curious about the technical details. Yusuf's face lit up with the enthusiasm of a creator discussing his greatest work. The Concorde maintains that quantum tunneling propulsion and gravitational manipulation cannot coexist in the same system, he said. Their physics says the two approaches create interference patterns that would tear a ship apart. He pulled up a holographic display showing the hybrid engine's internal structure. They were wrong, he said simply, or rather, they were right about their technology, but wrong about ours. He explained how human engineers had approached the problem from an entirely different angle, using insights from quantum computing, research, and gravitational wave detection to create a propulsion system that did not merely combine two technologies, but merged them into something fundamentally new. We can outrun anything in their fleet, Yusuf said. Not by a small margin, but by a factor that will make them question everything they thought they knew about physics. They continued to tour through corridors that had been stripped down to the frame and rebuilt with human ingenuity. The hull was now composed of a metamaterial composite that did not exist in any Concorde database, something that Earth's laboratories had originally developed for deep-sea exploration vessels. It could absorb and redistribute kinetic energy in ways that made conventional weapons nearly useless, spreading the force of impacts across the entire structure rather than allowing it to concentrate at a single point. A direct hit from a Vulthury plasma lance would vaporize a standard Concorde vessel. Yusuf explained. Against our hull, it would disperse across the surface and bleed away as heat. Elena nodded. Impressed but not satisfied. And the weapon systems? She asked. What has Chun done with those empty mounting brackets? They made their way to the weapons control center. Where weapons officer? Chen was supervising the final installation of the Reclamation's offensive capabilities. Chum stood surrounded by holographic targeting displays and ammunition schematics, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a dozen different screens. The Concorde favors energy weapons, Chum said when Elena asked for a demonstration. Plasma lances, particle beams, focused radiation arrays. All of them elegant and precise and completely predictable. She pulled up images of the weapon system she had designed. For the Reclamation, I went a different direction, she said with a smile that promised violence. The primary armament consisted of kinetic accelerators, capable of launching tungsten rods at significant fractions of the speed of light. These projectiles carried no explosives. Requiring no complex mechanisms that might fail at critical moments, they were simply metal moving very fast. And nothing in the universe could survive a direct hit from something moving at that velocity. Elegance is overrated, Chum said. I prefer effectiveness. She showed Elena the secondary systems. Missile batteries carrying warheads that could split into thousands of independent targeting units. Overwhelming any defensive system with sheer numbers, point defense. Networks ran on artificial intelligence systems, so fast they could track and destroy incoming fire before organic mines even registered. The weapons were not beautiful by Concorde standards, lacking the flowing lines and harmonious designs that alien species favored, but they were brutally, ruthlessly effective. The Thesan will call us barbaric, Chun acknowledged. The Valkyrie will be horrified by our lack of sophistication. She shrugged with complete indifference to alien opinions, but barbaric wins. Elena felt something fierce rising in her chest as she surveyed the work her crew had accomplished. But there was one more innovation she wanted to see. The one she had personally requested when the refit began. Show me the command integration system, she said. They made their way to the bridge, which looked nothing like any command center in the Concorde. Every alien species operated their vessels with organic crews, supplemented by limited automation systems that handled routine tasks. It was a tradition stretching back millennia, a point of honor that separated sentient commanders from mere machines. Elena had studied this tradition carefully and recognized it for what it truly was: a critical weakness. The Reclamation could operate with a crew of 40. Enough hands to manage every system and respond to any emergency, but it could also operate with a crew of 4. The artificial intelligence systems, taking over functions that normally required dozens of specialists, and in extreme circumstances, it could operate with no crew at all, fighting on as an automated vessel, even if every human aboard had been killed. Redundancy had been built into every system. Backup upon backup upon backup. Hull breaches could be sealed in microseconds by self-healing materials and emergency force fields. Power could be rerouted through 17 different pathways if the primary conduits were destroyed. Critical systems were distributed throughout the ship, rather than concentrated in vulnerable locations. The Reclamation could continue fighting even if 90% of the vessel was destroyed. The remaining 10%, still capable of dealing death to any enemy. Elena sat in the command chair, feeling the ship respond to her presence as systems came online around her. How long until we can launch? She asked. The final systems are being installed now, Yusuf replied. We can be underway within the week. Elena looked around the bridge at the crew who had made this miracle possible. Yusuf with his engineering genius, Chun with her weapons expertise, Okonkwo with his tactical brilliance. They had taken an insult and transformed it into something magnificent. She is ready, Yusuf said with quiet pride. Elena shook her head, her hand resting on a console that mixed human touchscreens with salvaged Korath interfaces. No, she said. She is hungry. She stood and walked to the main view screen. Looking out at the stars that awaited them, the Concord had given humanity a death sentence disguised as a gift. In return, humanity had created a weapon the likes of which the galaxy had never seen. Send a message to Concord Command, Elena ordered. Tell them the reclamation is ready for duty. She smiled at the thought of their reaction when they saw what humanity had built. Tell them we accept whatever assignment they consider appropriate for our capabilities. The message went out across the faster-than-light communication network, reaching Concord headquarters within minutes, and somewhere in the Great Hall where Elena had stood in humiliation 18 months before. Officials read her words and felt the first stirrings of unease. They had expected humanity to fail. They had expected reclamation to become a tomb. Instead, something was coming, something they did not yet understand, and the galaxy would never be the same. They handed us a worthless vessel. Humans made it invincible. Part 3. The Hunt. The Concord assigned humanity to the frontier, the lawless border regions where piracy flourished and elder races could not be bothered to send their precious fleets. Commander Elena Vasquez accepted the assignment without a single word of complaint, understanding perfectly well that it was meant as another insult. The frontier was where species went to die, a graveyard of ambition where young civilizations exhausted themselves fighting battles that more established powers considered beneath their attention. Merchant vessels disappeared there on a weekly basis, their distress signals going unanswered because no one wanted to risk valuable ships in such dangerous space colonies. Struggled to survive without reliable supply lines, their populations dwindling as the strong left for safer regions and the weak were picked off by raiders. It was a forgotten corner of the galaxy, and the Concord was certain that humanity would fade into obscurity there. One more failed species among countless others. Elena had other plans. For 6 months, the reclamation patrolled the frontier, responding to distress calls that other ships ignored and establishing humanity's presence in a region that desperately needed law and order. They escorted merchant convoys through dangerous corridors, their weapons batteries silent but ready, their reputation growing with each successful mission. Pirate scouts learned to flee at the first sign of the human vessel, having heard stories of what happened to those who challenged her. But there was one threat that even the pirates feared, one name spoken in whispers throughout the frontier as a warning to all who valued their Levisosek. The Endless had been raiding these space lanes for decades, commanding a fleet of 37 vessels crewed by the most vicious killers the galaxy had ever produced. The wreck were not members of the Concord, rejected for their excessive violence and their complete unwillingness to submit to any authority but their own. They operated in packs, like predators from humanity's ancient past, circling their prey and wearing down resistance before moving in for the Kilisek. Himself had earned his title through a long career of survival, escaping from situations that should have killed him 100 times over. He had fought against Concord fleets and won, slipping away into the darkness of the frontier before superior numbers could overwhelm his forces. He had raided colonies and stations throughout the border regions, taking what he wanted and leaving nothing but wreckage behind. No one had ever stopped him, and many had died trying. When his scouts detected the reclamation responding to a distress call from a Morvith trading vessel, Osik saw what he believed was easy prey. One obsolete vessel against his entire fleet seemed like entertainment rather than a genuine battle, a chance to blood his newer crew members before moving on to more profitable targets. He ordered the attack. 37 ships converging on a single point in space, where the humans waited beside the disabled. Merchant Elena stood on the bridge of the reclamation, watching the enemy fleet approach. On her tactical display, 37 contacts. Lieutenant Commander Okonkwo reported from his station. They are spreading into an encirclement pattern. The wreck tactics were predictable, surrounding their target and attacking from all directions at once. Overwhelming defensive systems through sheer volume of fire. It was a strategy that had worked for Osik for 40 years, and he had no reason to believe it would fail now. Weapons Officer Chun, Elena said calmly. You may begin. Chun smiled and activated the targeting system she had spent 18 months perfecting. Reclamation's tactical artificial intelligence identified every enemy vessel in less than a second, calculating threat priorities and optimal engagement. Sequences faster than any organic mind could process. The first salvo launched before the wreck even completed their approach vector. Kinetic rounds accelerating to velocities that the enemy sensors could not track. Osek's lead destroyers simply ceased to exist. The tungsten projectiles punching through their shields and hulls without slowing. The impacts releasing energy that vaporized everything within 100 meters of the strike points. The wreck formation shattered as captains panicked, their confidence evaporating in the face of weapons they could not understand or counter. Some tried to scatter, hoping to use their numbers to overwhelm the single human vessel through attacks from multiple angles. The Reclamation responded by doing something that no Concorde ship had ever done in recorded history. She split her attention 37 ways simultaneously, engaging every enemy vessel with independent targeting solutions that adjusted in real time as the wreck maneuvered. Chun's point defense networks swatted down incoming fire like a human swatting insects. The AI systems predicting attack vectors and positioning countermeasures before the wreck weapons even launched. The human ships seemed to be everywhere at once, dancing through the chaos of battle with a grace that belied her massive Sizzy. Osek watched his fleet dying around him and screamed orders for retreat. He had survived for 40 years by knowing when to run, and every instinct he possessed was telling him to flee before it was too late. But the Reclamation's engines, those hybrid monstrosities that the Concorde had declared impossible, allowed her to cut off escape routes before the wreck could reach them. Ships that should have been far beyond weapons range found themselves suddenly facing the human vessel, her guns already firing, their destruction already certain. Elena watched the battle unfold on her tactical display with cold satisfaction. This was not merely a fight, she realized, but a statement. Every wreck vessel that died sent a message to every species in the galaxy about what humanity was capable of when pushed beyond tolerance. She thought about the laughter in the Concorde Hall, the contempt in alien eyes, the worthless vessel that was supposed to be her tomb, and she felt no mercy whatsoever. The battle lasted 11 minutes from the first shot to the final surrender. Osek's flagship drifted dead in space, its engines destroyed, its weapons silenced, its legendary commander captured by human marines who boarded through breaches in the hull. 23 wreck vessels had been destroyed outright, their wreckage scattered across the battlefield like fallen leaves. The remaining 13 had surrendered after watching their comrades die, their crews kneeling before human soldiers who accepted their submission with professional efficiency. Reclamation had suffered minor damage to 2 exterior sensor arrays, easily repaired within hours. Elena walked through the brig where the prisoners waited, stopping before the cell that held Osik himself. The wreck warlord was massive even by the standards of his species, his body covered with scars that told the story of a violent life. His 4 eyes studied her with an expression she had not expected to see, not rage at his defeat, not defiance in the face of captivity, but something that looked almost like fear. "What are you?" he asked, his voice rough from screaming orders that no one had been able to obey. Elena considered the question carefully before answering. She thought about everything humanity had endured to reach this moment, the millennia of struggle on their homeworld, the centuries of reaching toward the stars, the humiliation of being dismissed as worthless by species who had forgotten what it meant to fight for survival. "We are human?" she said simply. Osek stared at her as if seeing something he could not understand. "I have fought the Velthari," he said. "I have raided Morvith convoys and escaped Thesan hunting parties, and none of them ever frightened me." He leaned forward against the force field that held him prisoner, his voice dropping to something like awe. "You frighten me," he admitted. Elena nodded, accepting the compliment for what it was. "Good," she said. "Tell your people what you saw here today. Tell them what happens when someone underestimates humanity." She turned to leave, but paused at the doorway to deliver one final message. "And tell them this is just the beginning." The news of the battle spread across the frontier within hours and reached Concord space within days. Osek, the Endless, the terror of the border regions, had been defeated by a single human vessel in less than a quarter of an hour. The ship that the Concord had given to humanity as an insult had destroyed a fleet that had terrorized the galaxy for decades, and somewhere in the great halls of power, officials began to realize that they had made a terrible mistake. They had tried to bury humanity in the frontier instead. They had created something that would not stay buried. The summons came 3 days after the battle, transmitted through official Concord channels with the kind of formal language that usually preceded declarations of war. Commander Elena Vasquez was required to present herself before the full council to explain the events that had transpired in the frontier. The word "required" appeared 7 times in the message, leaving no doubt that this was not an invitation. She could decline Elena, dressed in her formal uniform, the same one she had worn when receiving the reclamation as humanity's welcome gift. She polished every button and straightened every crease, knowing that appearance mattered in the political theater. She was about to enter. Lieutenant Commander Okonkwo wanted to accompany her as a show of support, but Elena ordered him to remain with the ship. "This is not a conversation," she told him. "This is a confrontation, and I need to face it alone." The Great Hall of the Concord looked exactly as she remembered it, the crystalline walls catching light from floating orbs, the assembled ambassadors watching from their designated positions. But something had changed since her last visit. The laughter was gone, replaced by a tension that hung in the air like smoke before a fire. The Arbiter stood on his ceremonial platform, his compound eyes tracking Elena as she walked to the center of the chamber. "Commander Vasquez," he said, his mandibles clicking in patterns that her translator identified as formal displeasure. "The Council has reviewed the engagement records from your recent patrol activities in the frontier." Elena stood at attention, showing no reaction to his tone. "There are concerns," the Arbiter continued. "Concerns, Arbiter," Elena replied, her voice calm and steady. "Your vessel's capabilities significantly exceed the specifications of what was provided to humanity upon joining the Concord." Elena nodded, making no attempt to deny the obvious. "We made some modifications." She saw a ripple of movement pass through the assembled ambassadors. Species that had laughed at humanity now shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The Velthari representative, a being of crystalline light that pulsed with agitation, spoke before the Arbiter could continue. "Modifications require council approval," the Velthari said. "This is fundamental law that has governed our civilization for millennia." Elena turned to face the glowing creature, her expression unchanged. "For member species, yes," she said. "But the gift vessel provision in Section 47 of the Concord Charter contains no such restriction." She paused, letting her words sink in. "We read the statutes very carefully," she added. The Thesan ambassador flickered into visibility, having apparently been watching from a phased state. "You have made a mockery of council traditions," the Thesan accused. "You have turned a gesture of welcome into a weapon of war." Elena felt something shift inside her, the careful control she had maintained beginning to give way to something far more dangerous. "A gesture of welcome," she repeated, tasting the words like something rotten. "Is that what you call what you gave us?" She turned slowly, her gaze passing over every ambassador in the chamber. "You gave us a derelict vessel that should have been scrapped centuries ago," she said, her voice growing stronger. "You gave us radiation leaks and failing engines, and a hull that was more hull than metal." The Morvith representative started to speak, but Elena continued without pause. "You gave us that ship and expected us to die in it," she said. "You expected us to fade away in the frontier like every other young species you have buried there. One more failure to add to your collection of disappointments." The chamber fell silent as her words echoed off the crystalline walls. "We did not die," Elena said. "We adapted." She stepped forward, and ambassadors who commanded armadas spanning thousands of light years flinched at the movement of a single human woman. "We took your insult and transformed it into something magnificent," she continued. "We built weapons your engineers said were impossible. Engines your physicists claimed could not exist. Systems your tacticians never imagined." The Arbiter's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of deep distress that Elena's translator struggled to interpret. "You cannot simply," he began. "Cannot what?" Elena interrupted, her voice cutting through his objection like one of Chun's kinetic rounds through enemy armor. "Cannot defend ourselves?" she asked. "Cannot protect the colonies your fleets could not be bothered to patrol? Cannot exceed the potential you decided we possessed based on nothing more than your own arrogance?" She stood in the center of the great hall, surrounded by the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. And she did not waver. "You measured us by your standards," she said. "You looked at our young civilization and saw only primitives playing with technology we could barely understand." Elena shook her head slowly, her disappointment evident. "You assumed that because we were new to the stars, we were weak," she continued. "That because our technology was simple by your standards, our minds were similarly limited." She pointed toward the great windows where stars glittered against the void. "You forgot that every species in this chamber was young once," she said. "You forgot what hunger looks like, what desperation creates. What happens when someone has nothing to lose and everything to prove?" The Concord representatives sat in stunned silence, unprepared for this confrontation. They had expected humanity to apologize, to make excuses, to beg for forgiveness for exceeding their assigned station. They had not expected defiance. "The reclamation was a test," Elena said, "but not the one you intended." She paused, making sure every ambassador was listening. "You wanted to see if we would accept humiliation," she said. "If we would be content with scraps from your table like grateful pets." A cold smile crossed her face. "Now you know the answer." The Arbiter recovered his composure, his compound eyes focusing on Elena with new intensity. "What do you want, Commander?" he asked, his voice stripped of ceremony and reduced to simple negotiation. Elena had prepared for this moment, rehearsing her demands during the journey to Concord space. "Recognition," she said. "Full patrol rights across all Concord territory, not just the frontier regions you consider expendable." The ambassadors stirred, uncomfortable with the implications. "Access to the same trade routes and diplomatic channels as any other member species," Elena continued. "No more second-class status. No more assignments designed to keep us contained and irrelevant." She paused, letting the silence stretch before delivering her final demand. "And the Council's formal acknowledgement that humanity earned its place among you," she said. "Not through begging or submission, but through excellence." The Arbiter conferred with the other senior representatives, their conversation conducted in frequencies and dimensions that human senses could not perceive. Elena waited, knowing that the next few moments would determine humanity's future among the stars. Finally, the Arbiter turned back to her. "The Council will vote on your demands," he said. "This is not a guarantee of approval." "I understand," Elena replied. but I think you will find that voting against us would be unwise." She gestured toward the windows where the Reclamation floated among the Concorde's mightiest vessels. "We have proven what we can do with a worthless vessel and 18 months of work," she said. "Imagine what we will accomplish with proper resources and proper respect." The vote took 3 hours as ambassadors argued and negotiated and calculated the implications of defying humanity's demands in the end. It passed by a margin of 7%, enough to establish the precedent Elena had sought. As she walked out of the chamber, she passed the Morvith ambassador, the representative of the species whose trading vessel she had saved from the wreck. "The Council will be watching you now," the Morvith said, his voice low enough that only Elena could hear. "They fear what you might become." Elena stopped and turned to face the massive alien, meeting his ancient eyes with her young and hungry ones. "Good," she said. "Fear is the beginning of respect." She continued walking, leaving the great hall behind, her footsteps echoing off walls that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Humanity had announced itself to the galaxy, and the galaxy had finally started listening. 50 years had passed since the day Commander Elena Vasquez stood before the Galactic Concorde and demanded respect for her species. The galaxy had changed in ways that even she could not have predicted. Transformed by the ripples that humanity's emergence had sent through the ancient order of spacefaring civilizations, the original Reclamation hung in permanent display at Earth's orbital memorial, her scarred hull preserved as a testament to what determination could accomplish. 100 battles had left their marks on her armor, dents and burns and patches where emergency repairs had saved her from destruction. Time and time again, she would never fly again. Her engines cold and her weapons silent, but her legend continued to grow with each passing year. Admiral Chun stood before the transparent walls of the memorial, looking at the ship she had once served aboard as a young weapons officer. Her hair had turned white in the decades since that first battle against Ossic's fleet, and her face carried the lines of a life spent commanding humanity's expansion across the stars, but her eyes still held the same fire that had burned when she designed the kinetic accelerators that changed galactic warfare forever. Behind her, rows of Naval Academy graduates sat in perfect formation, waiting for the ceremony to begin. They were not all human. Elena noticed with quiet satisfaction species from across the Concorde had sent their brightest young officers to learn from humanity's military academies, seeking the training that had produced the most effective fighting force the galaxy had ever seen. Valkyrie crystals sat beside Morvith giants. Thesan phase beings flickered next to creatures from a dozen other civilizations. All of them wore uniforms adapted from human designs, all of them proud to call themselves students of the species that had risen from nothing to reshape the galactic order. Admiral Chun turned to face the graduating class, her voice carrying across the silent memorial. "They gave us that ship as a joke," she said, pointing at the Reclamation through the transparent wall. "A rusted, failing, worthless piece of scrap that was meant to be our tomb." The graduates listened with the intensity of those who understood they were witnessing history. They believed we would die quietly in the frontier. Chun continued, "Another failed species to add to the forgotten list of civilizations that reached for the stars and fell short." She paused, letting the silence emphasize her next words. They did not understand what they were really giving us. Chun walked along the front row of graduates, looking into faces both familiar and alien. "They handed us motivation," she said. "A chip on our shoulder the size of the galaxy itself. A burning need to prove that we were worthy of the stars we had claimed." She stopped at the center of the formation, her gaze sweeping across the assembled officers. "Every weld we made on that ship was fueled by their contempt," she said. "Every system we rebuilt was powered by our refusal to accept the limits they placed on us. Every impossible solution we invented was born from a simple truth that the Concord had forgotten. The graduates leaned forward, eager to hear the lesson that had guided humanity's rise. "No one gets to decide our limits," Chun declared. "No one gets to tell us what we cannot become." She pointed again at the original reclamation, her arms steady despite her age. "The Concord looked at us and saw primitives playing with technology we barely understood," she said. "We looked at ourselves and saw potential waiting to be unleashed. Through the opposite window, the current reclamation floated in formation with Earth's defense fleet. She was the seventh ship to bear that name, each one more powerful than the last. Each one built upon the lessons learned from her predecessors. Her hull gleamed with technology that would have seemed like magic to the engineers who rebuilt the original vessel. Weapon systems that made Chun's kinetic accelerators look primitive. Engines that could cross the galaxy in days rather than months. But her design philosophy remained unchanged from the day Commander Vasquez first conceived it: adapt to any situation, overcome any obstacle, refuse to accept the boundaries that others set. Humanity's gift to the galaxy was not our technology, Chun said, though our innovations have spread to every corner of known space. She looked at the alien students among the human graduates, species that had once mocked humanity now learning from them. It was not our tactics or our weapons or even our ships, she continued. Though fleets across the Concord now follow doctrines we developed. Chun straightened to her full height, a voice carrying the weight of half a century of experience. Our gift was this, she said. We reminded every species in the galaxy that greatness is not given by others. It is taken through effort, built through sacrifice, forged in the moments when everyone tells you that you are worthless. The graduates rose to their feet, humans and aliens alike standing in unified respect. And you proved them wrong, Chun finished. She looked out at the stars that humanity now patrolled as equals among the elder races. The same stars that had seemed so impossibly far when she was young. Commander Vasquez had passed away 15 years ago, surrounded by her crew. Her last words, a reminder that there were always new frontiers to conquer. But her legacy lived on in every human who reached for something beyond their grasp. In every young species that looked at humanity's example and found the courage to defy expectations. The Concord had changed since those first days of contempt and laughter elder races now treated humanity with respect born of demonstrated capability, seeking alliances rather than offering scraps. The great halls where Elena had once stood in humiliation now featured human ambassadors sitting as equals among the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and it had all started with a worthless vessel that humanity refused to accept as their limitation. You are about to enter a galaxy that still contains those who will underestimate you, Chun told the graduates. Species who will look at your youth and see weakness, who will mistake your inexperience for incompetence. She smiled, the expression carrying echoes of the young weapons officer who had once dreamed of proving the galaxy wrong. Show them what happens when someone gives humans a reason to exceed expectations, she said. Graduates saluted in perfect unison, their fists striking their chests in the gesture that had become humanity's signature across the stars behind them. The original reclamation caught the light of Earth's sun, her ancient hull still gleaming with defiance. She had been worthless when the Concord gave her away, a derelict meant to fail, a tomb for a species that dared to dream above its station. Now she stood as the most famous vessel in galactic history, proof that the value of something was not determined by what it started as but by what it could become in the hands of those who refused to surrender. The Concord had thought they were insulting humanity. They had been challenging them and humans. As the galaxy had learned through 50 years of hard lessons, did not lose challenges. The ceremony ended and the graduates dispersed to their new assignments. carrying with them the legacy of those who had come before ships launched from Earth's orbital stations, spreading across the galaxy to patrol routes that humanity had earned through blood and determination. And somewhere in the great halls of the Concord, elder races watched humanity's continued rise and remembered the day they had handed over a worthless vessel. They had expected it to be a grave. Instead, it had become the foundation of an empire, not through conquest or aggression, but through the simple refusal to accept that anyone else could determine humanity's worth. The Reclamation had been transformed from scrap into legend, and humanity had been transformed alongside her. From primitives to pioneers, from jokes to juggernauts, from worthless newcomers to the species that taught the galaxy what it meant to be truly invincible, not through superior technology or greater numbers, but through the one advantage that no other species could match: the absolute, unshakable, infinite human refusal to stay down when someone tried to push them there. The stars belonged to those who reached for them, and humanity had proven that no one reached harder than those who had been told they had no right to try.